All right. Well, welcome everyone to More Than a Party podcast. I have a special guest with me, Cory Galindez, and Pastor Cory Galindez, and he's been a missionary, and he's done some amazing things, and I saw him just recently at our Bible conference in Tucson, Arizona, and he was just sharing some of the. He was a missionary in China, and we'll get to that. But just some of the things that he saw, that he went through, that him and his family went through. But before we even get to that, I want to give you an opportunity, Cory, if you could just introduce yourself and maybe tell my people who you are and where you're from and anything else.
Well, my name's Cory Galindez. Like Aaron said, I was a missionary in a couple of different countries. I was a missionary in China, and then we pioneered a church in Colombia as well. So I've been on two continents, and we'll get to the the consequences of that in a bit. But honestly speaking, I'm really no one of consequence. I'm just a guy from. I was born in Houston, Texas. I grew up in Wyoming. We moved down to Tucson, Arizona when I was 10 years old. Both my parents got saved and then started attending Pastor Warner's church in Tucson, Arizona. And I grew up in church, backslid for a while, 9 years, and then came back to Jesus. And it's just been a tremendous time. I mean, my worst day as a Christian is infinitely better than my best day as a sinner. So that's just a little bit about me.
So you backslid so you were a church kid, basically, essentially. You said you came into the
Essentially.
church at 10.
Yeah.
So you went away for 9 years. I guess we could speak into the kind of church kid dynamic of this real quick. So you grew up in church. What what was your life experience in that area? What kind of what drew you away from the church at a young age? Or I don't know when you left, but
Well, there's a difference between when I left physically and when I left mentally and
mm,
emotionally.
yeah.
Uh, because when I was a kid, I was 10 years old when we came into Pastor Warner's church. And I almost immediately just thrust myself into ministries. I started doing drama teams, working in children's church. And honestly, I did so much because I felt like Pastor Warner preached hour and a half long sermons and it was kind of boring. And I didn't want to be in there for Pastor Warner's sermons. It was a lot more entertaining to be elsewhere. So I tried to find excuses to be any place in the building other than the sanctuary during a Sunday morning service. There were a few pastors that I thought were funny, so I would listen to them. But by and large, I went through my formative years, like through puberty, through junior high, like that, avoiding Pastor Warner because he was terrifying to me. And then when I hit high school, a whole new battle started, which I didn't really even realize was out there. And that was my battle for sexuality. Being a drama kid and knowing how to put on a certain level of makeup, being able to walk through the supermarket and go, oh, that's my color. That's my color. I need to pick up more eyeshadow. I need to pick up more base because we were providing all of our own makeup for theater. Led my dad and a few other people to think that I was leaning toward homosexuality,
Sure.
because I'm always buying makeup and I'm always, in costumes and I'm always sort of like almost borderline seamstressing clothing, oh, I could make this, that, I could make, but it's just that my mind was so engaged in theater. But now all of a sudden I have these two conflicting pulls. I have the pull of my Christianity and the pull of my exposure to theater. And I really want to excel at both. But sometimes in theater, you are called upon as a character to do certain things that you would not do in the
Mm,
real world. You are
yeah,
called
yeah.
upon to say things, to kiss people, to pretend romantic relations, and that's not just a one-time thing.
Yeah.
It's through the course of a 3-week run. So it's impossible to not start developing physical and emotional ties to the people you're acting with. So they call it the green room experience, which means everybody who's in a green room together is dating everybody who's in the green room together.
Hmm.
So you have this now conflicting pull. And I wanted so badly to be a good Christian, but at the same time, I wanted so badly to feed my flesh and experience everything that the world of theater had to offer. So I started drifting my sophomore year of high school. And emotionally at church, I would be 100% engaged. But when I was at school or in the theater, I was 100% involved in the women of the theater. So I was still a virgin, but really in name only. Emotionally, I had connected myself to a lot of different girls. And emotional infidelity is more dangerous than physical infidelity, in my opinion, because your emotions run soul deep, So I ended up drifting away. And then after high school, I joined the Marine Corps. And that was a whole other level of disappointment because I got to the Marine Corps at the worst possible time to join the military. President Clinton was downsizing the military like crazy. So I walk into medical one day and they look down and said, you have bunions. And I said, well, I had bunions when I enlisted. They flip back through my paperwork, look, they go, oh, you sure did. You got to see a podiatrist. So I go to see the podiatrist. The podiatrist takes one look at my feet, goes, does that hurt? And I'm like, ow, yeah, that hurts. And he says, well, you can't be a Marine if your bunions hurt. And they discharge me.
Wow.
So, so I end up back in Tucson feeling like I'm a failure. And it was almost a level of PTSD before PTSD had a name, right? Because I had gone through enough of the training that they had unmade me as a human being. And they had trained me to take orders, do the thing, kill the person, do whatever, right? You just do what you're supposed, like what you're told to do. And morality has no place in your life anymore. There's no longer a sense of right or wrong. There's just following orders. And that's all there was to it. And then in that moment, before they had remade me to be able to make decisions and to say what is a lawful order and what is before they replaced that sense of morality in me, they kicked me out, put me on a plane, and sent me back to Tucson.
Hmm.
So I came back to Tucson with almost a level of psychosis. I couldn't sleep.
Wow.
I wasn't eating. Um, I would get up every morning and run 5 miles. Every morning, run 5 miles. And I was always training to be a better combatant, training to go back to the Marine Corps, training to fight for my country. And that was an opportunity that would just never arrive. And I felt so out of place because I felt like my home was the Marine Corps. And now I can't be in my home. That ultimately that led me to like coming in for counseling a couple of times with my youth pastor. I talked to them a few times, and situations like this are hard because it's kind of a unique situation and nobody really had answers for me. And then I ended up going to my unsaved older brother who's like, look, man, I don't have any of the solutions for you. And I thought, for the first time,
Yeah.
somebody's being honest with me,
Yeah.
right? He
Yeah.
got no answers, but he handed me a joint and went, smoke this, it'll make you feel better about it. So, so, so he had no solutions for me, but he did have medication for me.
Yeah.
And from that moment, I started going to church less and less
But
and started hanging
Corey,
out with him
Corey,
more and him.
medication is the solution. Don't come on now. That's what everyone says these days, at least.
False.
Yeah.
Medication is just a medication. It's essentially I ended up putting a band-aid on a bullet wound.
Yeah.
I'm spiritually I'm free bleeding, and I'm just like, well, I can make it feel better. And
Yeah.
so I drifted away from church, ended up hanging out with my older brother, found a whole new group of friends, even changed my name. My first name is Raymond, and my middle name is Cory. And my entire church life, I've been Cory. But the moment I left church, I became Ray because I wanted to distance myself from the personality that I had built in
Yeah.
in my years in church.
Wow. Wow, that's incredible. I didn't even realize that. And so when you came back to church, you were like, okay, I'm coming back to Corey.
Yeah, and that was kind of a hard transition because 2 years after I backslid, I was so heartbroken and so out of answers, right? I was at the end of myself. I came back to church on a Sunday morning, and one of my closest friends, now I come staggering into church, man. I'm in huge skater jeans with, ripped up Chuck Taylors and this massively oversized shirt. And I've got an earring in my left earlobe, and I've got an earring in my right cartilage. And I've got kind of a goatee going, and my hair's a little long. And I come walking into church, and I'm just like, I'm at the end of myself, man. I got no other solutions. And
Yeah.
I'm looking for some sense of belonging.
Mhm.
And one of my closest friends walked up to me as I'm standing in the back row of church, sitting next to my youth pastor, and I've got my hands lifted, and I'm just trying to feel God again. And he walked up and grabbed the earring and started to pull it out of my ear. And and he just asked me, really quiet in my ear, "What are you doing here? You don't belong here." And he's pulling the earring out of my ear. And it got to a point where I realized he's going to tear that out of my head. So I punched him in the face in the back of the main sanctuary and busted his nose. So he's bleeding all over the place. I stand there for a second. There's a gasp in the back row. Everyone's looking at me. Everyone's looking at him. He's holding his face. There's blood running all down the front of his suit. And I just walked out of the building, and I never entered the building again for 7 years.
Wow.
So when I came back, I only thought that I had been brought to the end of myself. I really did. I only thought. I have a ton of stories I could tell you about my years being backslidden that would probably eat up the whole show. But suffice to say that by the end of that 9 years, I was sitting in a room in Flagstaff, Arizona. I had two kids that were asleep in the bedroom behind me. My wife had left me. She was living in the dorms at NAU, actively dating around, trying to find another future Mrs. Scully or Mr. Scully. Um, and I'm sitting there and I'm looking down the barrel of my 1911, and I can see the hollow point round that I've chambered, and I'm going to kill myself. I'm done. I'm done. And I'm not joking, Aaron. Graveyard serious, bro. I am sitting there and I'm looking down the barrel of this gun, and I'm going to shoot myself. And there's a voice, an audible voice over my left shoulder that says, "Ray, if you do this, there's going to be some consequences. And I need you to understand those before you pull that trigger. When you pull that trigger, you're going to leave your children alone in the world. But Sarah is going to find another husband. Sarah is going to find a man who will love her the way you can't. These kids will have a father unlike you. You will vanish from this world. No one will remember you. But that's good, because no one will be able to bear the weight of the horrible life that you've lived. Your parents will be free of your debt. Your friends will be free of all your BS. No one will have to put up with you ever again. The world is going to be a much better place without you in it." And I smiled and sighed, and I felt this huge weight come off my shoulders, and I started to squeeze the trigger, and a voice, an audible voice over my right shoulder said, "Cory." And it made me stop, because no one had called me Cory in almost a decade. I said, "If you pull that trigger, there's going to be consequences, and I need you to understand them. If you pull that trigger, you're going to stand before God, and you're going to answer one question. You know that question. He's going to ask you, what did you do with Jesus? Are you prepared to answer that question?" And I sat there looking at the gun, and the weight of that reality hit me, that I'm about to step into eternity, that God is about to judge me for my sin, and I have no answer for him. And it freaked me out so much that I threw the gun, and it hit the dresser and fell into the laundry basket. And I'm looking at it through the mesh of the laundry basket, and I'm just thinking, what the heck? And then I start to weep uncontrollably. And I go, I'm a failure as a husband. I'm a failure as a father. I'm a failure as a friend. I'm a failure as a son. I'm a failure as a Marine. And now I can't even kill myself right. And I just looked up at heaven. I said, "God, what do you want from me, man?" And God said, everything, son. I want everything from you. Give it to me and watch what I do with it. And at the time, there was a Potter's House church, a fellowship church, just like 3 blocks from our house. And in my mind, I never said it, but in my mind, I was thinking about that church. And I said, all right, man, you want me to go to church? I'll go to church again. That's cool, if that's what you want. And God said, no. And I was like, I don't mean to nitpick God, but for 9 years, you've been haunting me. And now I say I'm going to go back to church, and you say no. And he goes, no, you're going to go back to Tucson to Pastor Warner's church, where you broke hearts, where you damaged people, where you destroyed relationships. You're going to repent there. You're going to serve me there, and you're going to make it right. And I went, okay,
Wow.
all right.
Wow.
So at that point, that was a Thursday night. Friday, Sarah came over to discuss our divorce, our formal divorce. I told her that I was going to go back to Tucson to go back to church. And she was like, you don't go to church. And I said, I know. Look what I've done with our life. I mean, look at this. It's a mess. She says, if you're willing to go back to Tucson, a city you hate, full of people you hate, just to go to church, I'll go to church with you.
Wow.
And I thought, this is a miracle, man. This is a miracle. Yeah. So we packed up a carload of stuff, like 2 duffel bags and some pillows, and left everything in Flagstaff. Drove down through a blizzard from Flagstaff, Arizona into Tucson, got there Saturday afternoon, went to church Sunday morning. That was March 30th of 2003, and we've been saved ever since.
Wow. Wow. Praise God. And so Sarah, she got saved not long after you, or when you rededicated your life, not long after, or?
Same day. So I'm
Wow.
literally sitting in the altar call, and Pastor Warner's pulling the altar call. And I start to raise my hand to say, yes, that's me. I'm a backslider. I need Jesus. And as I start to raise my hand just freezes right here. Because for the first time in 9 years, I think a biblical verse. And the biblical verse that I think is, be not unequally yoked with an unbeliever. And then the thought is, what happens if you get saved and Sarah doesn't get saved? Now you're unequally yoked. You're disobeying God. Better if you just don't get saved, right? So my mind is tumbling this, okay, and I really don't know which way is up. I'm just like, and then all of a sudden the singing starts and people are standing, and I think, my God, I missed my chance. I missed my opportunity. And as I'm sitting there, sort of reeling over that, a guy named Roy Gallardo comes and sits next to me and goes, hey, bro, I just wanted to ask you, man, is anybody? I said, shut up. And he goes, what? And I said, shut up and pray with me right now before I change my mind. And he goes, what? And I was like, just pray with me. So he prays the sinner's prayer with me. It's like the easiest conversion anybody's ever had, right? It's just, shut up and pray with me, man. So he puts his arm around me and he's praying. And I come unglued, man. I'm sobbing through the prayer. God is just gripping me. And I'm like, God, I surrender. I surrender. And then I hear a sound behind me, and it's someone else is sobbing. And when I turn around, Barbara Conrad is praying with Sarah. And I was like, oh, thank you, Jesus. Now, I don't know about you, but I have a serious hard time believing in coincidence. There's no such thing. It's like unicorns, right? In order for us to be talking about somebody and them to walk in and us to go, hey, speak of the devil. Dude, they had to get up at the right time, get dressed at the right time, get out of the shower at the right time, get in the car, catch all the lights right to walk into the room as we're talking about. There's no such thing as coincidence, mathematically improbable. So we get up from the altar. Freddie Gonzalez Sr. walks up to us to take our convert cards, and he says, hey, tonight, every 3 months or so, we do a baptism, and tonight is our baptism service. If you guys wanted to get baptized. And we said, yes. So we were saved Sunday morning, March 30th, baptized Sunday night, March 30th. And from the moment that we stood up off the altar, I mean, there was this animosity and hatred between us. I mean, there was never a sharp word missed, And when we stood up from the altar, Sarah looked at me, and I thought, my God, I haven't seen her look at me with love in like 2 years. Like, if God stopped right there, it would take 100,000 eternities to ever thank him for repairing my marriage. And yet he doesn't stop there. He took us way further than we ever imagined possible.
That's so powerful. That is so powerful. And the course of just in your life in Tucson as a Christian, I'm sure you have a ton of testimonies that have taken place, and I know you were really involved in it. You took your skill as a drama person, a theater kid, and incorporated into the church. And I know you were really involved with a lot of the plays, a lot of the dramas that Tucson did. But speaking of Freddie Gonzalez Sr., Freddie Gonzalez Jr., um, you also had an encounter with him, which is, again, no coincidence, that Freddie Gonzalez, Pastor Gonzalez Sr., was the one that maybe approached you. And then later on down the road, you're going to be helping his son, which is an incredible story. And I'm sure you probably don't, and I know this already, you started off this podcast with it, but you don't like accolades, but it's very commendable what you did for Pastor Gonzalez Jr. So, if you don't mind, if you could just share with my listeners how that came about, and we can just go from there.
This particular story is really treading on miracle ground, because you said there's no such, like you said, this wasn't a coincidence, but it goes way deeper than that. It goes way deeper than just Freddie Gonzalez Sr. walking up to us and taking our convert cards and being,
Yeah.
associate pastor at the time. After we got saved, I went to school. I got my EMT certification, and I couldn't find a job anywhere. No fire department was hiring straight EMTs. You had to be fire certified. All of the ambulance departments were full. There was no place to go. So I ended up getting a job at University Medical Center as a patient care technician. So I needed a whole other certification, but they put me through the training, and they gave me the patient care technician certification. So I was good to go. I moved forward. I worked there a couple of years, and I'm exposed to the medical community, right? And then I leave that job, and I move on, right? And we're going to come back to that. That's important for a reason, but I've got to come back to it. Then years later, Freddie Sr. has always had this link with me, because he was there at the beginning. He called me one day. We were in the main sanctuary, and my cell phone rings, and I pick up the phone. Hello, and it's Freddie Sr. Hey, Cory, this is Freddie Sr. This is Freddie Gonzalez, associate pastor at the Dora Christian Fellowship Church. I'm just following up on you, just seeing if you were going to be able to make it to church tonight. And I was like, we're already here. And he goes, well, what? And I said, we're already here. We're standing in the sanctuary. And he steps out of the office in the foyer and looks at us and then waves and goes, hey, it's good to see you.
Oh, that's awesome. That's great.
So there was always this connection, this friendship and kinship between Freddie and I. But that's because there was also a kinship between his son and I. Before I backslid, he was in a band called Sons of Thunder, and I freaking idolized him, man. He was just
that's so cool.
awesome, right? And it was just like, man, one day I want to rock as hard as Freddie rocks. And so he comes into the tape room one day, and we're working, and that's cassette tapes for you boys and girls. That's tiny plastic things that hold audio. So we're working in the tape room, and we're recording the sermons and stuff to disseminate them all around the world. And Freddie comes in and goes, hey, can you do me a favor, Cory? And I was like, sure, what's up? He goes, can you pray for Freddie Jr.? I was like, yeah, of course, what's up? He goes, I don't know, he doesn't feel good. And I'm like, okay, yeah, sure, I'll pray for him. So he walks out, and I do what every good Christian does when somebody walks up to you and asks you, can you pray for a kind of vague, ambiguous thing? I forgot, and I didn't pray about it at all, right? Mm-hmm. And so 2 weeks later, Pastor Freddie comes in, and he says, hey, I just wanted to thank you for praying for Freddie. And I'm like, just riddled with guilt and conviction and condemnation, right? I didn't pray. And I was like, he goes, I just want to thank you for praying. He goes, so we found out what's going on. And I said, all right, what's going on? He says, well, Freddie's in kidney failure. And I was like, oh no. well, now it's serious, man. And now I really feel like a jerk that I didn't pray at all. So he goes, so just keep him in prayer. We're trying to figure out what the next steps are. But we know what's happening. At least we have a direction. And I'm like, okay, no worries. So now I really start to pray in earnest. And I'm like, God, what do you want me to do? I want to help. I want to do something. You've got to direct me. You've got to and in my mind, I'm thinking, and I pray for 2 weeks. I fast for 3 days. I'm like, you just got to tell me what you want me to do and I'll do it. And I'm thinking, Freddie and Michelle have at that time, 7 kids. And I'm like, maybe Sarah and I can take our tax return, pack up all 7 kids and take them to Disneyland for a week.
Wow.
And we can just take them for just let Freddie and Michelle have a breath, just let them come up for air for a week. And then, and that's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking something in that vein. And I'm like, do I need to buy food for a year? Do I need to start sending money? What do you want me to do, God? You just tell me and I'll do it. And God touched my heart in the middle of prayer and said, tell him you want to donate a kidney. And I
Wow.
went and I said, well, that's a little extreme, man. I mean, it's not that I'm unwilling. It's that how do you just call somebody up and go, so you want a kidney? I mean, it's just a
Yeah.
weird
No. Yeah.
conversation. I mean, in today's modern society, you don't just interject yourself that deeply into somebody's personal life. I'm just like, what do I do? How do I say it? How do I even bring up the topic? So I've heard a ton of sermons preached about Gideon and how he wasn't really a man of faith because he threw all these fleeces before the Lord. But so maybe I'm not a great man of faith, but I threw a fleece before the Lord. I was like, okay, Lord, here's the deal. I want to make sure that this is you talking to me and not me coming up with some crazy harebrained idea, right? So I'm not going to offer this. 100% the answer is no, unless the next time I talk to Freddie and Michelle, they bring up the topic of transplant.
Wow.
If they bring it up, I'll offer. If they don't, I'll just assume that it was me coming up with the idea and I'll let it lie. So 3 days after that, I get a phone call from Michelle and we're talking and I'm like, hey, how's Freddie doing? And she goes, well, Cory, and she goes quiet for a long time. And through kind of hiccuping sobs, she says, they say if he doesn't get a new kidney, he's going to die.
Oh my gosh.
And I said, okay, Lord. I just look up at heaven. I'm like, all right, she brought it up.
Yeah.
I'm going to offer.
Wow.
So I said, Michelle, I'd like to help with that if I can. And she's like, what do you mean? And I was like, I'd like to offer Freddie a kidney. And she goes, well, Cory, that's great. That's very generous. And she starts acting like I said, hey, do you guys want me to order a pizza for you? Well, that's very generous, but no, we're not really hungry. She's just really
Yeah.
sort of, and I said, hey, no problem. You and Freddie pray about it. You think about it. Let me know what you want me to do. And she says, okay. So I get a call 3 days after that. It's Freddie and Michelle on speakerphone. Said, Cory, were you serious about that? And I said, yeah, of course I am. Well, why would I joke about something like that? Of course I'm serious.
Yeah.
And he says, well, we're going to pray about it. We don't want to make a bad decision. We're going to fast and pray because in the 3 days between you offering that and us calling you back right now, 62 people have come forward from our congregation and our family to say they want to donate a kidney.
Oh my. Wow.
But the way the process works is we have our insurance pays for the process. So they're not going to test multiple people at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have to choose who goes first and they will test them until they disqualify them. And then I have to pick who goes next. And I said, well, Freddie, how long will that take? He says, the testing itself can take up to 6 weeks. to just get tested and approved.
Yeah.
And I said, okay, so 6 weeks times 60 people. Dude, that's like 4 years. Do you have 4 years? Silence. He
Mm.
goes, so we're going to pray and we're going to fast. And I want God to tell me who to pick to go first. And I said, okay. So they fast for 3 days. They call me back. They go, Cory, both of us independently feel like God said, tell Cory to get in the pool. So I called the Mayo Clinic and I said, what's the process? And they go, well, it's 6 weeks. It's like 2 appointments a week for 6 weeks. I said, if I compress that, how fast can we get it done? They said, we can do it in 2 days, but it's going to be the worst 2 days of your life. And I said, 2 days it is. Let's schedule one for this week and one for next week. And so we went up to Phoenix and we did a whole battery of testing. And they weren't lying, man. It was arduous. It was arduous.
Yeah.
And at the end, they pull me into a conference room. I mean, we've gone through all this, the very last step. They pull me into the conference room with both the donor team and the recipient transplant teams. And the two head doctors say, Cory, we're not sure how to tell you this. And I was like, okay. They said, we normally we say that you're a good tissue match or you're just a donor match for the recipient. But after we took his cells and your cells and grew them together to see if there was going to be rejection issues, we can't say that in good conscience because the term perfect tissue match is more applicable. And we don't know how that happened without the two of you being family or being related.
Oh my.
So I just felt that it was confirmation of everything
Yeah.
that God said, you're going to do this. And then I was his perfect tissue match. I was a closer match than any of his relatives could have been. It was as if we had been grown from the same skin,
My
you know.
goodness.
So we went through the donation. 2 weeks after that, we scheduled the donation. So all things considered, less than a month from the moment that he decided to have us get into the pool, less than a month later, the transplant was done, and he's still pastoring in Washington State. They have two more kids since then, so he's doing great and is
That is
very
so.
very full of life.
Oh my gosh. I know. I remember. So what year was that? I just want to make sure I'm remembering correctly.
I think that would have been 2008, maybe
Yeah. So yeah, I was
right
there.
around there.
I remember when that happened. Yeah. And I remember Pastor Gonzalez Jr. getting up on stage and just thanking you, and it was just so powerful. Um, and I
Oh,
remember.
so
Oh, go ahead.
no, go ahead, go ahead.
Oh, I was just
I
gonna say
just
I remember hearing that testimony of like it was just the match that you guys were was again just a miracle. You know.
yeah, I had mentioned that I have to go back to working at UMC. There was a moment when I was talking to Sarah after the surgery, and they had told us all the risks, right? You could
Yeah.
bleed out on the table. The risk is worse for the donor than it is the recipient. They told us all these things. And I said, no, we're moving forward. And so after the surgery, I'm laying in bed recovering. And I looked at Sarah and I said, you okay? And she goes, yeah, of course I'm okay. And I said, were you worried at all? And she goes, no, you told me that you were going to do this years ago. And I said, what are you talking about? And she says, when you were working for UMC, a team came in and started talking about living kidney donation. You came home with a packet of information. I have it saved. And you said, Sarah, I think that God is telling me to give a kidney to somebody, but I don't know who. And she goes,
Wow.
God will reveal it. And she goes, that was years ago. You don't remember that? And I said, no, I don't remember that at all. So, so God prepped us right after we got saved for this miracle he was going to do like 5 years later.
That's so powerful. Just it really is a miracle and such a I know for you probably just such an honor to be now linked to that church in Washington for forever, or really wherever he goes
Yeah.
to be linked to that. But going back to what you were saying too, when you weren't saved and you were contemplating taking your own life when you were like, okay, God, I'll go back to church. And God says, no, I don't want you to go back to church. I want everything from you.
Yeah.
And you have literally given everything, you and your
Not
family.
yet.
Not yet, not yet, not yet. But as far as while being here on earth, you know, being here on earth, um, more than just pioneering a church, you and your family have gone into the mission field.
Mm,
And so China was the first country that you've been in. Then you went to Colombia, and that was a different story. But so why don't you take us through, when you first, I guess, maybe felt called to be a missionary, and of course, it's not just you; it's also your wife and kids. That you're saying, hey, what do you guys think about China? So what was that like? When did you first feel called to take your family and go overseas?
That's a difficult question, Aaron. This is the first time I ever felt called. I was 13 years old. Uh, I was went down to pray, and I told my parents boldly, I'm going to hang a Japanese flag right there.
Wow.
And no, I didn't, right? Somebody else went to Japan. But the fact is that I had a heart for international work. But I I want to kind of back up a little bit. I was driving around Tucson one day, and I pulled into the parking lot of this condemned church. It was this old Baptist church that was getting torn down. It was halfway torn down. They were building student housing there for the University of Arizona, and some of the parking lot was still intact, and half the building was still intact. And I was just walking around because I like places of urban decay. I think they're beautiful things. You go to forgotten places, and it was sad to me that this church had been forgotten. That at one point it was probably a thriving congregation, and now it's being torn down to make way for student housing. And as I went to leave the place, there was a sign hanging on, like two signs on either side of the parking lot exit. And the signs were just small red and white signs that said, "Caution, you are now entering the mission field." And I loved it so much that I looked around and then stole one of the signs and took it home with me
Wow.
from this construction site. And I hung it on the back of my front door because while I felt this call to international mission work, right, and there was this, my heart was on the horizon. At the same time, I never wanted to forget that I'm already in the mission field. I never wanted to think like, one day when I'm in the mission field, I'll do this. One day in the mission field, I'll behave like this. One day when I'm out in the mission field, I'll pray every day or study every day or read every day.
Mhm.
I wanted to
Yeah.
remember I'm in the mission field right now, you
Yeah.
know? So the first time I felt called was 13 years old. But when we got saved, about 3 months after we got saved, we were driving home from church, and I don't know who came in. It was a guest preacher, and they preached a sermon, and it was kind of like one of the almost men's discipleship, rah rah, where are the men, rise up, O man of God, be sent. And I went down to the altar and I pray and I come back, and we're uncharacteristically silent on the drive home. And Sarah's just looking out the window, and I'm driving. And she looks over at me, and I had been thinking, man, I'm struggling. How do I bring this up? Sarah had never been raised in church. She had no idea what the culture of our fellowship was. She had no idea what the process of being discipled and then sent out meant. She had no idea any of that. She was raised by new age hippie parents, and had zero exposure to Jesus aside from the fact that he was the kid in the little hay filled box at Christmas.
Yeah.
Um, so she's just looking out the window, and then she looks over at me and she goes, "You're going to be a pastor one day, huh?" And like my heart kind of sinks. I'm like, oh, because look, to be honest, man, you got to be careful who you marry, because if you marry a woman who says, "I'm never, ever, ever going into the mission field," but you feel called to the mission field, guess what? You're never, ever going into the mission field, because if she's not with you, you can't do it alone.
Yeah.
So I'm sitting there and my heart kind of sinks, and I think, oh man, what is she going to say? What's her impression? And I looked over and I kind of like, I'm processing all the possible responses, and I end up just saying, yeah, I think so. And she goes, cool, and just looks back out the window. And
Right
that was
on.
the end of the conversation. That was
That's
the whole conversation. So at that point, I think both Sarah and I really started to prepare our hearts for going one day. And the kids were only 2 and 3 years old, you know? So we started raising them, telling them, just imparting in them from the very beginning, one day we're going to go. One day we're going to go. So when the opportunity arose for China, it actually ended up being two opportunities simultaneously, because Sarah has dual citizenship. She's an Irish and an American citizen. So we had access to the EU as well. So Pastor Warner was hemming and hawing. He wasn't really sure if he wanted to send us to Germany or to China. And so we were back and forth about it the whole week at conference. And then finally, Thursday, Pastor Warner comes rolling out from the church and he goes, you guys ready for tonight? And I said, yeah, Pastor, except I have no idea where we're going. And he goes, I never told you. I said, no. He says, China. I was like, brilliant, awesome. So it was Thursday between the morning services and the evening service that we got the final okay that we were going to China. And we were excited. It was tremendous. But getting to China was a whole other thing. I mean, we take a little flight from Tucson to Phoenix, and then a flight from Phoenix to LA. And then from LA, we're sitting in LAX for about 6 hours, just putzing around LAX in the international terminal until we finally load up into this huge Dreamliner, which is a beautiful aircraft. And we fly for 15 and a half hours to get to Changsha. And when you think the flight's almost over, no, it's not even halfway over. And then you think it's about halfway over, and no, it's not even about halfway over. You can watch like 6 whole seasons of something in 15 hours. So we're like, we finally land, we're exhausted, we go through customs, and we step off the plane, and there's not an English word anywhere.
Wow.
And we just stood there like, how are we supposed to get around? How are we supposed to figure this? And people are just screaming. Everybody's screaming, taxi, 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 taxi. And you're like, no, stop touching me. And thank God, Mark Crumpler, who was a missionary in China in the 90s, had come up from the city that he was pastoring in and met us at the airport, arranged
Wow.
for our taxi cabs, got us to our Airbnb, and then showed us like how to navigate the city and how to move around the city. Because I think we probably would still be sitting at that airport. But it was a tremendous opportunity. And of course, like you said, when you go out, you're not just going. There's a whole family involved. There's a whole dynamic about the kids, and the kids were 16 and 17 years old, 15 and 16. They were 15 and 16 years old, and they were there for 2 years. And honestly, there were moments that they loved and moments that they hated, but it was an awesome experience.
Oh, I'm sure. And that could be said about, just staying stateside. Times you love and times you hate. And so you were there for 3 years. Because
Correct.
I know your kids came back early to go to school and attend the University of Arizona.
Yeah.
But why don't you take us through? And again, I know I'll probably have to have you back on just to share some of the stories that you experienced in China. Um, but so you're there for 3 years, and then this little thing called COVID happens, and of course, you're in the heart of it all. All we hear about is, you know, um, I mean, it's just where it started, and it's just some foreign place, literally, off, in the ether somewhere of where it started, and but you were literally there, um, in China when all of this is happening. So why don't you take us through that?
It was weird. When it first started, we just kept hearing rumblings about there's a weird pneumonia in there's a weird pneumonia in Wuhan. Now, we were in Changsha in the Hunan province, and that's deep, deep central China. 1 hour north of us was Wuhan. It was the next stop on the fast train. So when you're taking the fast train, it was about 15, 20 minutes to get to Wuhan. And we started hearing about this pneumonia. And then we heard about this doctor who had released a memo. And we read the memo, and the memo was really just, it was an internal memo that he sent out to like 7 of his doctor friends that were like, hey, I'm noticing this weird pneumonia in Wuhan. Has anybody else seen anything about this, like weird pneumonia? Has anybody else experienced this? And one of his friends posted it on Weibo, which was the Japanese Twitter, or I'm sorry, the Chinese Twitter, and it exploded. Like everybody like is reading this 4 sentence email or this 4 sentence memo saying, "Hey, has anybody else noticed this?" And all of a sudden, he's being like told to take it down off Weibo. He's being assaulted by the police. He's being blacklisted from the medical community. And at that point, I started to go, what's this all about? Right
Yeah.
now, that was in late August of 2019 in China when all this is happening. Then we start looking into this pneumonia outbreak, and China has these AI robots at the hospitals. You walk in and it's all touchscreen, but it looks like a
Wow.
person, right? It's just a nurse. And you're just sort of like giving it symptoms, and then it directs you to where you need to go to see a doctor about that thing, right? And the robots, the AI reports get published on Weibo for 10 seconds. And when they're up, it says that back in July of 2018, these AIs started registering an uptick in a strange new pneumonia in Wuhan. So you're talking a year and a half before we notice it, before this guy writes a memo, and then another 5 months before it goes worldwide. So it was a strange, strange time to be in China because we're watching China devolve into people taking water jugs, just water jugs, and cutting the bottom out of water jugs and sliding them over their head like that's going to protect them from a virus. We watched other people. I literally was sitting on the subway next to a guy who had a surgical mask on that he had cut a hole in so he could smoke through it.
Oh, so
And
smart.
yeah, it's brilliant, man. So like, and because that's going to keep them safe from this mystery virus,
Yeah, yeah.
and and I'm looking at the stupidity, and I'm thinking, dude, if we were in America, none of this stupidity would be happening in America. And I was like, Americans are so intelligent, we'd be questioning everything. We'd be looking at all this going, this is
Wow.
ridiculous. What are you
Yeah.
talking about? Plastic shields and stuff. This is stupid. Who are you kidding? It's
Yeah.
all the same air. And then Pastor Warner called us and was like, hey, between a media that likes to blow a bunch of stuff out of proportion and a Chinese government that doesn't like to share anything, where is it really? So we started talking honestly about the situation in China and how lethal the virus was, how people were getting pulled. The last plane, the American consulate sent me an email and said, if you're leaving China, you need to leave right now. So Tuesday, we have a C-130 waiting for all of the people in the Wuhan district to load up. You have to be there by 6 in the morning in Wuhan at the airfield. Get on the C-130. We'll bring you back to an airbase. And I ignored the email. And so Tuesday comes and goes. Thursday, I'm sitting there. Sarah's in America. I'm in China, and I go, I wonder what consulate is my consulate when things get really, really bad. I wonder which consulate I'm supposed to go to. So I type in Changsha, Hunan Province, American Embassy Consulate, and it comes up Wuhan Consulate is your consulate. And I'm like, well, they left 2 days ago. So now I'm stuck. So now I've got to get down to like Guangzhou or someplace. They were restricting travel across the country. It was very strange. And then Sarah came back, but she was flying into Hong Kong. And we had planned a little 3 day mini vacation in Hong Kong when she came back. I get to Hong Kong. Sarah's wheels up. She's in the air. I get a phone call from my daughter who says, Dad, are you still in Hong Kong? Do you have mom? And I said, no, I'm headed to the airport right now to pick her up. And she goes, how are you going to get back to China? I said, what are you talking about? She goes, Hong Kong just sealed the border with China. I said, no. She goes, yeah. It's all over CNN. I'm looking at the news right now. I'm sitting at the U of A. I'm looking at the news. It's all over CNN. So I turn on CNN in the hotel room and I'm watching. And it wasn't that they had already closed the border, but at 8 o'clock that night, they were sealing the border with China. So I rush to the airport. I pick up Sarah. I explain everything to her. We rush to the train station. We change our tickets from 3 days from now to that day, the last train out that day. So at 7:30, we're on a train and the train is empty. We are the only people on the train. And we're sailing on this fast train back into China. And the train coming out of China, the last train coming out of China, is literally standing room only. It is packed with people and hundreds of people pouring off the train to get out of China. We're the only two people trying to get back into China. Sarah says, "Does this feel stupid to you?" And I said, I'm not sure how I feel. It's very weird, right? So we get to Changsha and the place is empty. It's utterly abandoned. We go to Walmart, Walmart's closed. There's no place to buy food. So I open my fridge. I've got like a few steaks, some food, a couple of things of water, and that's it. There's no place open because everybody's evacuating the city. So Pastor Warner calls me and we're talking back and forth. And I said, the big worry right now is food, Pastor. And he goes, well, let me give you my credit card number. I want you to book a flight for tomorrow. Come back for 2, 3 weeks. You'll be able to visit the kids, hang out a little bit. And then after that, we'll send you back when things blow over. And I said, sure, that sounds great. No worries. So we booked the trip. But Sarah's like, Pastor, if I book for Wednesday, it'll save you like $3,000 a ticket. And Pastor's like, I don't care. Come back tomorrow. But that's a lot of money. And
Yeah.
it's a lot of money that's not ours, you know? So we're
Yeah.
like, so Sarah booked for Wednesday. We wake up Monday morning, all flights Wednesday are canceled, not
Wow.
rescheduled, canceled. Here's your refund. And Sarah's like, oh no. So we book for Tuesday and we pray the whole way to the airport. First flight out Tuesday. We get on the plane, we fly to Beijing, which is our first layover. When we get off the plane in Beijing and our phones reconnect to cellular and update, it says, no more flights in or out of Changsha. Changsha has been sealed. No more ground travel in or out of Changsha. The army has moved in. You are now to report to the army to receive your social passport. You'll be able to get food 3 times a week from the army, depending on how many people live in your house. And so it was the military rolled in and they declared martial law in Changsha. So we were literally on the last plane out of Changsha. We have a 25, 30-minute layover in Beijing. We get on the plane, we fly to Taipei, Taiwan. When we land in Taipei and our phone connects to cell signal again, it says the same thing just happened in Beijing. It's been sealed. Martial law has been declared. No more flights in or out of Beijing. So we're in the last plane out of Beijing. Then we flew into LA, and the security at LAX was a joke. It was like we walked in and they were like, were you in Wuhan? And we said, no, we were 1 hour south. Okay, good. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. All of the sick people, when Wuhan was overflowing, were coming to Changsha. So there's a chance we've been exposed. I mean, there's a solid chance we've been exposed. And they're like, but were you in Wuhan? No. Okay, you're free to go.
Wow.
And so we just walked through LAX wondering, I wonder if we're spreading plague all around the country. And we rented a car and drove into Tucson, and they put us up in a house for a couple of weeks to make sure that we were, not contagious, that we weren't sick. And then we rejoined the congregation. And 8 days after we got back from China, the world closed.
Yeah.
The world closed. 3 weeks after we got back from China, my dad got very sick and then died. And I'm sitting there, and when I send Pastor Warner the text announcing, hey, my dad went to go be with Jesus, he says, Cory, I want you to just stop and think before you do anything else. Just stop and think about the massive worldwide events that God orchestrated to bring you back so that you could be here to be with your dad when he died.
Wow.
And I just thought, it's true, Pastor. It's true. So, I mean, like Joseph, what the devil meant for evil, I think God orchestrated for good. And I think that there's been a lot of fruit from the pandemic, but it was a very weird time to be in China, to be sure.
Oh, I can't even imagine. And boy, were you wrong when you thought the Americans were gonna question everything. A lot of them fell right into line, man. And
I'm standing there watching. I was in line at a supermarket, and this lady who's wearing just a plastic face shield is standing in front of me, and she turns around and looks at me, and she goes, get the back. You're not more than 6 feet." And I was like, "What are you talking about?" She goes, "You're not wearing a mask." I said, "Neither are you."
I know,
You're
I know,
breathing the same air I'm breathing, man.
I know. Not even, yeah, exactly. Not even to get too much into that because I don't want this to get demonetized, which two of my episodes already have, and so I'm on my last strike. If I get, if I have one more,
Edit this out in post.
yeah, it's over. I might have to switch up to Rumble or something. No, because I mean the Americans. I mean, there were. Granted, there were a lot of people who stood up against it,
Yeah,
including myself, including my dad, and we were just really standing up against the authoritarian, takeover that so many governors were, trying to implement, including California, New York, and um, yeah, 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 yeah. So I mean, that's what we were really just pushing back against, and then just the forced closure of so many churches. But thank
yeah,
God we lived in West Virginia, where none of that really happened. And you're right, we did see a lot of fruit
yeah,
um, from that, from the COVID crisis, where churches were shut down and people were looking for a church, and we were like, "Hey, we're open," and we didn't close, and people came and people got saved and people locked
yeah,
in. So it really was, again, what the enemy meant for evil, God turned it around. And
yeah. It was tremendous.
and so it really, for us, it really did, turn out to be something that God God moved in. And even for myself, I have stories I could tell about people, wanting to ridicule me and all these different things. And now I'm like, hey, look it, I was right. I was right the whole time. 3 years later, now we all agree. Now we all
Yeah,
agree.
yeah, yeah,
But you couldn't say those things. But going back to you, was it kind of? I mean, you invest your life for 3 years. You pour yourself and your family. You move and start a new life into China. You come back, and now, what was the reaction when you were like, kind of, it settled in your heart probably that I, I probably won't go back for a while at least. What was that like for you?
I think all times of relocation are a little bittersweet.
Mm,
You know, there's this weird sense that you're going to do something else, so there's this excitement about what's next,
yeah,
but there's this absence of what was,
yeah,
you know. So there were a group of disciples in China that they're like children to us, you
mm,
know, and our heart was breaking for them because like what's going to happen, But one of my disciples is regularly in contact with me.
yeah,
The other was regularly in contact with us and then kind of fell off the grid for a while, and we were praying for her. And then about a month ago, she texted me to say, "Hey, it's your long lost daughter,"
that's
and
awesome.
and so we talk back and forth, and turns out she's getting she just got her visa approved to come to the U.S. in July.
Wow.
And so I'm going to try to meet up with her either in California or have her come on a weekend to Tucson so that I can introduce her to Pastor Warren or Pastor Garrett, everybody, and start getting her locked in with her heritage, which is, I think that's so there's a sense that, man, I've lost all of this, but you haven't lost it,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know, because it wasn't yours to begin with. They
yeah,
weren't yours. They were God's. They were God's kids, and God cares about them more than I do.
yeah,
So, when they came to the saving knowledge of Jesus, it wasn't just that. Um, okay, now they're mine, right? They're no, that's there's no proprietary ownership that happens in the Christian experience. I'm introducing people to Jesus, and then Jesus is going to hold them, even if I'm not there to hold them. And the same thing happened in Colombia.
Yeah. Yeah, and so you're back in the States for a little bit, and then it starts. I'm sure it starts itching again. That
It's a good word.
to get out there into the mission field, and you set your eyes on Colombia, or was that presented to you by Pastor Warner, or how did that come about?
So, like I said, the first time I ever felt called to the mission field, I told my parents I was going to hang a Japanese flag right there. So I've felt in my heart a connection with Japan for most of my life.
And you
So
learned Mandarin, right?
I did.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
and so I'm sure there are people in Japan who probably, I'm sure, speak that outside of Japanese, or
No,
no?
no,
Oh, okay.
the Japanese hate the Chinese and the Chinese hate the Japanese. So I had a
Oh,
dream when I was in Changsha that if you really want to see revival happen both in China and in Japan, let a Chinese church bring a Christian invasion team to a Japanese city.
mm,
Because now the Japanese go, but I hate those people, but they love me.
yeah,
And then there's this breakdown of that history
yeah,
where the Chinese people can link hearts with the Japanese people. And I think at that point, revival would break out in both churches. Um, because they would realize that this superseded geopolitical associations, that in God's eyes, there are no borders, there are no countries, there are just people.
yeah,
And there are only two classes of people: people who believe and people who are being drawn to believe. And that's it. Those are the only two types of people. You've got sinners and saints in
yeah.
the world. So when I wrote Pastor Warner an email about Japan, about Osaka specifically, and we were like, and I dumped the email off, and this is, gosh, man, November, December, and I just send off this email. No, it would have been earlier than that. It would have been April or May, because this was the year of the weird conference where we had the conference in November. And so I send off the email, and I pitch it out there, and I'm just like, hey, pray about it. What do you think? A month and a half goes by. Then all of a sudden, I'm watching Thursday night of the Las Vegas, New Mexico conference, and they announce another church into the Tokyo area in Japan. And as I'm watching this, my phone buzzes, and I pick up the phone, and the phone says, it's Pastor Warner texting me. Okay. And I look at the announcement, I look at the phone. Is Pastor Warner in New Mexico right now? And Sarah's like, yeah, he announced that he was going to preach in the conference. And I was like, he preached this morning, right? And she goes, yeah, I think so. And we look at the schedule. Yeah, he preached this morning. I was like, so he's sitting there right now seeing this announcement into Japan, and then just texts me, okay.
Okay.
And I go, all right. So we start studying Osaka. We start investing ourselves. I'm brushing up on my Japanese.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, let's start. I pull out all my old textbooks, and I'm rereading in Japanese, learning to read again, and re-memorizing my hiragana, my katakana, and my sentence structures, and I'm like, all right, I think we're ready. And then conference rolls around, and Pastor Garrett calls us into the office, and I was like, all right, here we go. We're gonna good time. So as soon as we walk in the office, he goes, so Japan. And I went, yeah, Pastor. And I just start gushing about Osaka. The price of living is low. The people are open. It's a living city. It's not a working city like Tokyo. People live here. People, they rest here. This is a place where people can be reached. And he goes, yeah, we're not feeling it.
Wow.
And I went, really? And he goes, yeah, we want to feel it, but it just feels like it's just not time. It's just, it's just not time for that. And I said,
Mm,
okay. And he goes, but we do have some other options on the table. And I'm like, okay, hit me. What are the options? So he starts to talk about like sending a church to Marana. he starts talking about sending a church to Saurita. These are suburbs of Tucson, and I'm like, I mean, my eyes are on the horizons, man. I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm out
Yeah.
there. I'm like, give me a tall ship and a star to steer her by. I want to go places where no one's ever been. And so I'm kind of like, and I'm totally meh about everything. And he goes, but there's one place that's like a Macedonian call, Cory, because I just can't get it out of my head. I just keep thinking of it over and over and over again. And I said, where? He goes, Colombia.
Wow.
And my first thought is, Pastor, I don't speak Spanish. I speak Mandarin. I speak Japanese. I speak a little bit of Russian, a little bit of French, a little bit of Creole. I don't speak
Wow.
any stupid. I'm like, we talking about Spanish. I took Spanish 4 times and failed it all 4 times. I'm
Same,
like, this
same.
is clearly not a language that I'm going to learn. And so that's the first thought that goes through my mind. And I just sit there, and God goes, I helped you learn Mandarin.
Hey.
And I went, all right, I'll think about it. So he goes, think about it, pray about it. Don't answer me right now. Let me know tomorrow. And I went, okay. So we walk out of the office. I go to sleep that night and I can't sleep. I'm just laying there staring at the ceiling in the darkness. And I start to get this sense that God is going to do something miraculous in Colombia. And he says, son, I'm going to do it with or without you,
Wow.
but I'm giving you first dibs. Do you
Mm.
want to participate? And I went, I got to say yes. I have to. I have to say yes. So I get up and I go to work, and I'm 5:30 in the morning. I'm working, and I'm like, I got to say yes. I got to say yes. And then all of a sudden, this urgency gripped me. I got to say yes before somebody takes my place. And I went, I type up this whole email to Pastor Warner and Pastor Garrett. Yes, 100%. We're there. And I get to the end and I'm like, I'm about to hit send and I stop and go, wisdom says that I should probably check with Sarah before I send this. so, so I called Sarah and woke her up and she's like, hello. And I was like, hey, I need to talk to you really quickly. What do you think? And she goes, look, babe, you know me. I followed you to China. I'll follow you there. If this is what you feel like God is leading us to do, then let's do it. And I said, all right, great, send. Thanks, baby. I love you. And I hung up the phone. And
So cool.
so then Pastor Warner announced us the next night. So
Oh, man.
we landed in Colombia like we landed in China. We didn't speak a single word of the language. We're just like, I had no idea which way was up, and just in a year and a half got pretty good. I'm pretty proficient with Spanish now.
That's so amazing, Cory. I mean, it really is commendable, to do what you guys have done, and to be missionaries, to go out into the mission field, and you at least for sure have one more stop, and that's in Japan. That's for sure. You already know God's gonna.
God willing,
You
God
already know
willing.
God's gonna open that door. I mean, you've answered and you've been so willing, and you've said yes. Here am I. Send me to places that are not your original feeling of Japan. And so God said, okay, let's do China, and you're like, okay, Colombia, yeah. So you already know God's gonna honor your guys' faithfulness. Cory, I'm gonna bring this to a close. I'll probably split it up into 2 parts, but I really do appreciate you. I want to bring you back on and get some more stories, and maybe
Of course.
the good and the bad. People. One of the things Pastor Adam at this past conference, he was just talking about how church kids or PKs, pastors' kids, they often remember the bad, but and I know there is, but I know there's good. And so you already shared a couple testimonies of the people in your church in China that have reached out to you, you've stayed in contact with, and now one of them's going to come and meet all the people in Tucson. So I know you're excited about that. But so I definitely want to get some of the good stories, and maybe some of the confusing ones of trying to learn languages and getting lost and all that stuff. I know there is, but I appreciate you, Cory. Thank you so much, man, for doing this and for blessing us. And I know everyone's gonna love it. So thank you, Cory.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I just want to say really quickly in parting that you keep saying that what we've done is commendable, but honestly, what we've done is simple obedience, you know.
Hey, yeah,
And every great thing that you read about, whether it's in the Bible or whether it's in history, has all started with a yes.
yeah,
So, you know, the real power is the yes.
I love it. So when you get everyone listening to this, when God challenges you to to give up a kidney to to go to China, you better say yes,
Just
man.
just say yes.
Just say yes. I love it, Cory. Well, I appreciate you, man, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day. I'm gonna get off here, but tell the family and everyone that we love them and we're praying for them and all that good stuff.
Absolutely. Thank you, Aaron. I appreciate you, bro.
No problem. No problem. Thanks, everyone.